Alrighty, welcome everyone. We're just going to take a minute to have everyone file in and then we'll get started. Alrighty. Thank you everyone for virtually coming out tonight. I'm Gracie. I'm the events coordinator for print. A few housekeeping details just before we get started. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is on the bottom right of your screen, or in the question and answer function, which is on the bottom bar of your screen. I'd like to just start us off by thanking the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance for their partnership on this event. They're an invaluable organization for the promotion of literature in Maine, and we've been so fortunate to work with them on a number of events, both inside and outside of quarantine times. If you'd like a copy of Why I Don't Write, I will include the link to the print page in the chat box, so you can click right on through. And now just a quick introduction for our speakers. Elizabeth Strout is the best-selling writer of 7 novels, as well as a recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for Olive Kitteridge. She lives in New York City. Susan Minot is the best-selling writer of also 7 books, it's a lucky number, comprised of short stories, novels, and poetry, and is also a screenwriter. She lives with her daughter in New York City and on an island off the coast of Maine. So please join me in virtually welcoming Elizabeth Strout and Susan Minot.
Okay, great. Hi, Susan.
Gracie.
Lovely to be here with you because I just think that your work has been unbelievably gorgeous from the very beginning of your career. And I am so interested in how your sentences are, they're so clean. To me, you write the cleanest sentences, I think probably of any writer that I know of this generation. So do you want to just start by reading the first story, just a piece from Pole Pole, and we can go from there?
Sure, I'll just read little, very short bits. I think it's hard, people's eyes make sort of glaze over listening to someone reading in this kind of venue. But this is, it's the first story in the collection, and Pole Pole, the title is, it's a Kenyan word, which means, you know, sort of take it slow, slow down, but it also means sort of shame or kind of thing, like if you've, you know, hurt yourself.
Fascinating.
So this is this is about Daisy, who's a documentary filmmaker who's in Kenya for the first time. And she's just had a one-night stand with this sort of dashing, or at least crumpled journalist. And in the morning, she finds out that he's married, which she sort of hadn't bothered to notice or ask, but he didn't bother to tell. And right now, this is near the end of the story where she's waiting outside for him to take her home. And there's been a little incident with the man and a member of his staff. He's got a woman named Cecily who lives in the house nearby. And so she's feeling a little sort of sheepish at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, Daisy stood waiting next to the Jeep in the driveway. Through the front window of the cottage, she could see the man on the telephone with his back to her, facing the wall, talking to the wife, she figured. It was bright outside and she was without sunglasses. She strolled off to be out of sight of the man, scuffing the ground. Many footprints had distressed the dirt. Suddenly, she felt exhausted. For a moment, she was back in bed with the man. He was holding her wrist. She felt swept up again, and it ran through her body. Sex was like that. Not all of you came back right away. Part of you lingered with the person, not unhappily. It was nice to be relieved of yourself, though eventually that part would return. She had moved into the shade near Edmund's house. The one door was open to the turquoise painted wall. There was thin grass in the front yard and a small circle of charred wood. Against the ochre wash of the house sat 2 white molded plastic chairs. A small child appeared in the doorway wearing a pink sleeveless dress with ruffles at the shoulders and eating a papaya. She eyed Daisy. Daisy smiled and said, "Habari." The girl's eyes widened and she looked behind her for instruction, then stared again at Daisy. Cecily appeared behind the little girl, carrying something, shooing her out of the door. Her arms were straining under the weight of the large gray tub. The little girl sat on a log near the burnt area, biting the papaya, still watching Daisy. Cecily hauled the tub to the end of the yard near some scarlet hibiscus and tossed the water out. It floated in the air like a mirror, then came down flat and made a circle of puff in the dirt. Cecily turned around and looked at her, a white woman standing on the tan drive in her tan skirt. Daisy waved and smiled and started to step back, rocking on her sandals. Cecily came forward a few steps and stopped. Her smooth, solid face was not smiling. At first, Daisy thought she was getting some version of the cold stare, the look of disapproval any girl might get stumbling out of the man's cottage, possibly one in a series of aimless white girls. But when Cecily lifted her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, Daisy saw a different expression. She was looking at Daisy with pity.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's fabulous. I mean, like a mirror, the thrown water is like a mirror. It's just every sentence is so precise. There's not one wasted word. So my question is, how much do you rewrite to get to that point? And then a second question would be, have you learned to write that way more as time has gone on?
Well, that's an interesting question because I can answer the second question first, which is I crazily rewrite more now.
Oh, interesting. That is so interesting.
It's sort of obsessive. It's why I write less. It's not why I don't write, but
right. No, I get it. Right. Interesting.
It's as if I've become more impatient with a sort of rolling out of words into sentences. So I think if I'm going to bother, I want it to be, and take out which I don't need. And yes. So how much time as your writer life does that, in your writing life, does that take? I mean, I would say 20% is a first draft.
Yeah.
20% more is kind of in the story, like adding things I didn't know. And, probably 50 or 60% is just going over it and over it and over.
Yeah, right. And that's different from when you first started to be a writer?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I still, I would say with my first book, Monkeys, I did that more. And then I was a little less patient, I think, for a while. I don't know. I've always been pretty painful.
No, exactly. Your sentences have always, I mean, I'm just curious what it feels like from your point of view, because from my point of view, they've always been just pretty perfect sentences all along.
That's very nice of you.
So,
if you see the first version and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, I also feel like I don't, what goes on in my mind and my ideas or thoughts are in no shape to be sort of shared with them. I really have to get them organized. I
get it.
Like they're
to distill it.
Worth it. Mm-hmm.
It's distilled. There's a sense of this being completely right. So, okay, well, great. So now can you read a little bit from the story Occupied?
Yes, I will. This is a part that this is actually an outtake from the novel that I've been working on, that a lot of these stories were procrastination away from finishing. And this story itself is part of the novel, but I wanted to just, I was getting impatient, so I just wrote a story that's with the character Ivy, who's a single mom who's an artist, and she's on her way home to her 8-year-old son who's with the babysitter. But she thinks she's just going to dip down. She's in Manhattan to look at the occupied Zuccotti Park protest there.
Yeah.
It's been there for a month and she hasn't seen it. And as she walks through and is looking at people and observing, there was a time when she could have easily been one of these protesters, and but now she's got a child, and she's also has a love affair where the man is sort of elusive, and she's very much thinking about him. But she's also, as we always are, thinking about many things at the same time.
Exactly.
And by going back to this area, she can't help but think of 9/11. It's 9 years after, and it's just right near where the construction is still going on. So this is just as part of remembering what she saw that morning. She was out and she watched one of the towers drop from about a mile uptown in Washington Square Park. The vision had been very like a hallucination. You could not believe what you were seeing. That was the phrase everyone kept using. They couldn't believe what they had seen. Her brain immediately registered the otherworldliness of the seconds. The image entered, and she was aware in that instant that it would never leave her. Out of the thousands of images which the city gathered and posted and printed and beamed after that morning, none she saw had been from the precise place where she stood watching as her knees buckled, dropping as the building dropped. That was one time when what was in front of her was greater in intensity than what she saw depicted after. Not like the park in front of her now, more puny than it's looked in its pictures. On that Tuesday morning, she felt that as a witness, she was a kind of custodian of the deaths. It sounded self-aggrandizing, so she never admitted the feeling, but she had taken it inside her, the obligation. But really, what kind of custodian could one be of such a thing? And what could one do with it? The sun was no longer visible, having dropped behind the buildings, though the sky would be light for another hour. She wondered now, as she paced down the sidewalk slope outside the park, how many people had actually witnessed it, the murder of thousands of people, and how many others kept that vision inside them and felt as she did to be a guardian of it.
Great, thank you so much. You know, that's wonderful. One of the things, there's a couple things about the story that I wanted to mention, and one of them is, but not when she's recalling the falling towers, which she just read so beautifully.
Actually, an outtake of the story almost.
Right, but she's thinking about trees, and there's like a full paragraph where Ivy is just filled with the wondrousness of trees. And then at the very end of that paragraph, we realize the fellow that she's in love with never talked to her about trees. And I thought that was so, first of all, it was so perfect and it was so funny. And I mean, it was everything that it should be. You see what I'm saying? Because it was
because she felt that he was making her appreciate trees because she was feeling so
exactly. And you go on about these trees, and I'm like, oh, I get it. I know this wondrous feeling about trees. And then it's like, well, they never actually talked about trees.
No.
I just thought that was great. Also in this story, you have Ivy saying sorry a few times. She says it when she knocks a book to the ground with her knee, and then another time when a man, quote, swerved gracefully to give Ivy room to pass. It's a great phrase. she says sorry twice. And I was so struck with that because do you think that women say sorry more than men? I mean, in my mind, I thought, oh, I get that. I mean, it just rang so true.
I think
And I
she,
had not really thought about it until then.
I think she even says, why was she always saying sorry?
Right. So, and I mean, do you think that's a good
It's
thing?
almost,
I mean,
sorry that I'm here, sorry to bother you.
right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just, that was very resonant with me anyway. So, okay. Now green glass, you don't have to read from that if you don't want to, but I'm just, if you can just comment on the title. Well, tell us just a tiny bit what it is and how did you get that title? Because it's such a great title. And it did, I mean, did the title just arrive? I mean, I'm interested in how you get your titles.
Well, what did you think of the title?
I loved it.
I thought it was interesting.
No, I thought it was perfect.
Yeah. This is a story. This is one of my older stories. Some of the stories in this book were written in the 90s. This was written in 91. And it was published back then, but I haven't had another collection since then. So I'd include some of the older stories. And you can see this is a young couple basically being kind of bickering. They're newly in love, and Fran is guilty. She's guilty of being jealous. She's jealous of an old girlfriend of Tom's. So, and they go to a wedding and this girlfriend is there. And so they sort of bicker about it. And at one point there, well, I was thinking green is the color of envy.
Yeah. Right.
But
that's right.
But at one point they drive past some ponds.
Right.
Only moment that there's like
mention of the right.
It looks like green glass.
Right.
So it's like a reflection.
Right.
There are a number of reflections in this story.
This is wonderful. And I thought, wow.
Also, it's like a glass you drink from, a green glass of jealousy, and you're
well done.
up with it.
I'm just saying, well done. It was just, anyway, so I was curious about that.
That's interesting you asked about the title, because I had an idea at one point of calling a collection of stories Green Glass. And there's going to be a green glass something in every story.
Oh, yeah.
It would have a different, and I had a number of stories that I was going for, that they would each have a different, there'd be something different about the
permutation of the green glass. It was, I just thought that was stunning. Okay, so why I don't write. Do you want to read a little bit from that? Because I have some lines that I loved myself, but why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So why I don't write is kind of, as someone said, like the spine in the middle of all these stories. It's obviously ironic title because it is a story, but it's a bit like other people have called it. They think it's like a poem because it really is almost just these lines. It's like the thoughts basically that pass through a writer's mind.
Exactly.
That keep her from getting to the page. And some of those things are intriguing things that make I'd rather think about that. Some of them are the disturbing things that kind of take the wind out of your sails. Some are just a sort of hopeless feeling or whatever. So here's just a little part. So all day you ask yourself, what are you doing all day? 53 dead, not including the shooter. Your balance total is, when you take the plant out of the plastic container, pull the thin roots to dangle down and place into the hole, give it water. Tunnel, no light at the end of. 1 hour, then another. The title of the song, Crawl to Me, Baby, Crawl to Me. Are you going to the march? As soon as you gave them a donation, they bombarded you with continual requests for more. They heard back from the doctor. It was not good news. I walk around the city and listen to people as I pass them on sidewalks. Usually they are talking on their phones. Often they are not looking at where they are going. They are looking into their palms. You're in the wrong line. Your line is over there. The sweet air in the morning, warmed by the sun. Headache, hunger, the thumping far below the floor. Death estimates ran from 150 to 500, but could not be confirmed. You write if you have to.
It's great. Are you done? I don't want to interrupt because
No.
yeah, I mean, so I mean, for me, from the very first sentence, what do you do all day? She asked. I thought this is the perfect question that people are always asking. Right? I mean, I think it's like, what do you do all day? And I just thought, yeah, I get that. I totally understand that. And I don't even know.
A lot of what you do all day is not right.
That's exactly right. But it's a part of it, nevertheless.
That's
you know, like just stumbling around the apartment and sitting down and staring into space and then getting up and watering the plant and sitting back down is all a part of it somehow. So I just thought that was just a resonant, you know, what do you do all day? It's like, I don't sit at the typewriter all day or the computer, whatever they might think. And then here's another line I love. Something is dripping, life is not right. And I love that because the first interpretation is something is dripping in a bathroom or a sink, or there's a sound of something dripping and life is not right. But then for me, I also took it to be like something could be dripping inside the writer. You know, there was an internal, external kind of thing. I just thought that was.
I also thought, even though this doesn't say it,
Yeah.
I was thinking of like intravenous feed.
I get it. Okay. I get it.
I mean,
that's interesting.
You know,
right. Something's dripping. I get it.
You're supposed
I mean,
to know that at not, but it's just kind of in it.
That's so interesting because there's so many ways that line can be interpreted. Something's dripping. But then at another point, shall we meet for lunch? I'm sorry. I mean, is
only
it
a writer can like really appreciate.
I mean, honestly, is it your experience that meeting for lunch completely blows the day?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
And I think that people don't.
Sometimes you decide if you're going to meet for lunch,
right? Because you need to or whatever. But I mean, I have always personally found it. Oh, there goes the whole entire day. So, you know, dinner's one thing, early morning's another thing, but for lunch, it's just like smashes the day. And that was really very funny. And then, okay, so a child watches his dad lose his patience, the look in the child's eye. Oh, that went straight to my heart because I know I mean, I feel like I know what you mean. And everybody who reads that will have their own interpretation of that look in the child's eyes. But that was just wonderful. And then
like that fear that you see with the child.
I know exactly what you mean.
You're seeing, oh, here's the beginning of just
yeah. It reminded me of like years ago in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, all of a sudden I saw a father just hit his child on the back of his head, and the child was so shocked and terrified, as he would well be. But I've never forgotten it, you know, because this is what happens in the world, and it's just awful to see these things. Okay, so, and then in that story as well, women writers without children, many. Women writers with children, few. Do you want to talk about that or not? It's fine. I mean, anyway, I found it really interesting, but if you don't,
well, it is one sort of the subject of the novel I'm writing. She's a writer and she's a single mother, and it's you know, it's a cliche to say, but it's a real conflict to be
it is.
An artist and a parent, or a mother, I think.
Right, more exactly. That's true.
I know a lot of. I seem to know more arrangements where there's a man who's a father, and he's got a co-parent to do a lot of the raising the child.
the way
And
it's
I think, that's both historically true throughout. I mean, one could have said writers who are male, many writers who are female, few, throughout history.
Right. No, exactly. Of course.
That's the first stage.
Right. Exactly.
But the second stage is that's one big
Yeah.
reason,
Right. I know. And it remains, anyway, we all know what it remains.
But it's important to,
to consider.
To note it, to speak from knowing it. Yeah.
And that's why I was glad to see it there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, so while it lasts, do you want to read from that or not?
Sure.
Okay. I just, okay.
Oh, no, I don't have anything from while it lasts.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's just talk about it, because I just thought you captured so perfectly. I mean, it was just unbelievably well done, the adoration and then the disembarking from that adoration of another person. And then
someone
the final
love. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the final paragraph is such a great one. I'll read it. Okay.
Yeah.
Just the final sentence.
Good.
But once it doesn't give anything away, but it's just it was just so precise and Susan Minotty. But once a person became aware of being in a dream, it was difficult to stay asleep. The thing that kept one asleep was not knowing that you were sleeping and not thinking. She tried to block out any further disturbance, but a voice came, insistent, breaking through the dream membrane. Hurry, the voice said, getting louder. Hurry. Now, okay, so my question is, does that ending, do you write from beginning to end? Like, how do you achieve that kind of ending for a story like this?
A story's not done until I get an ending like that.
Okay.
Until I find it.
But do you ever find the ending before you write the whole story, or is it? I mean, your endings are great.
Let me think. In some of these, sometimes, I mean, I'll think one of the first stories I ever wrote, which is Hiding, one of the first stories in Monkeys.
Yeah.
Going way, way back. But that was definitely, I saw this image of children like hiding in a closet.
Okay, right.
And their father was not looking for them. And that was a sort of terrible moment. Yeah. And I thought, okay, this story, I've got to write the story to set that up.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's I knew where the ending was going.
Right. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you generally write pretty much from beginning to end, or?
I never write from beginning to end.
Right.
I write beginning, middle, near the end, back to the middle, back to the, I write like I'm doing a painting.
Right, I get it. I understand that. I mean, I know writers who do write from beginning to end.
I know.
And I'm always amazed.
It's a wonder
I just don't understand it. I mean, but good for them, but I just don't, anyway. So, all right, now Cafe Mort, that's a very different kind of story and fun. And how did that come about?
So that came about,
different.
That's a story. It's a restaurant story. And when in my early days in New York, I worked in a restaurant. I thought there are a lot of stories of restaurants.
Oh,
God,
so
I didn't want to write a story. I didn't know if I was going to write about that experience. I wanted to think of something different about it.
Right.
It was a restaurant that I didn't really relate to. I didn't really relate to the clientele or really the people that I was working with. It was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And so I literally thought about, it was kind of deadly in there. And then I thought, I sort of took the metaphor and I thought, that would be cool if you wrote a story where everyone is dead who comes to this restaurant.
Right.
Now, but then just that conceit in and of itself doesn't mean anything unless you do something with it. So I thought, and then all the people working there are serving the dead. Yeah. Who would be serving the dead, but people who are grieving for someone, like many people we know, just let go. And people have different periods of grieving. And
Right,
so
right,
it ended up being both this playful thing about, you know, ways different people
right,
die, because I'm interested in ways people die, like the
right.
way they exit.
Yep,
Um,
I get it.
and also kind of grief and getting over something. She kind of gets over something in this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I thought it was surprising and really,
yeah.
wonderful.
Kind of a
Different
ghost
kinds
story.
of, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Okay. So Boston Common at Twilight. Um, this was such a story. I think I felt like it was almost a novel. It could have been it was a novel in a story. The breadth of it was so extensive, and I don't. I hope you can read from it, but I don't want to give it away because, there are certain things that one should just come upon as a reader
Yeah.
and absorb.
But
But
it does, you know, it does shoot forward
yeah,
in time.
unbelievably, and
And
just like
sort of gets summed
very,
up and
but very quietly. I mean, I think what I just was struck with how many things were packed so tightly in it without a sense of it being tight. I mean, there's always a sense of, open porousness, even when your sentences flow so beautifully from one to another. There's a sense of like almost gentleness in the style. And I was so struck with the juxtaposition of the tone of the sentences with the violence that was taking place in it. I thought it was amazing that you did that. And so maybe you could find some part to read from, and then the reader can enjoy it
yeah.
themselves.
Well, this won't give it away, but we're with
Okay.
a 15-year-old preppy named Ned, who's sort of
Yeah.
on a Christmas break, but he's still at hockey practice and staying with his aunt in Cambridge, and he decides before he goes to stay with his aunt and go back to hockey practice next day that he's going to stop by the Boston Common and buy some pot. Now we're in 1971.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
we're like 78,
Right.
1978. And so he's kind of tall and gangly, and he's heard from someone that you can like get pot nearby. So he sees this woman kind of loitering nearby. She had slicked hair parted in the middle and rounded into a ball at her neck. She wore a rust-colored leather jacket, belted at the waist, and narrow blue jeans with a flare. Her sunglasses were tinted brown, darker at the top. Each cheek was smugged with brownish rouge. The woman walked by Ned, not meeting his eye. Pot, she whispered, holding her lapel with crimson fingernails. Ned looked around. There was a businessman in a suit moving briskly toward the subway. Three ladies, probably secretaries, walked beside one another in skirts and snow boots. No one was paying them the slightest bit of attention. Okay, he said. The woman nodded, still not looking him in the eye. Ned couldn't believe how easy this was. It was definitely going to blow away his brother Matt when he got home, and they went down to the rocks after dinner, and Ned brought out the pot. So far, it was either Matt or their neighbor Barney who had supplied it. The woman gestured her head. She turned, and Ned followed her, looking down to the square heels of her boots. A car went by blasting music. Another one bites the dust. The woman's shoulders went forward and back, like someone exaggerating. Ned had $17 on him. He figured he could borrow more later from Aunt Elsie if he needed it, which he probably would for the train home tomorrow after the last practice. The subway to Cambridge was 75 cents. He would set that aside. If the pot were more, he'd just ask the lady for half. He would bargain, make a deal. The woman headed into the subway entrance and started down the stairs. Ned kept a few feet behind her. Then she stopped in the echoing underpass and leaned against the blue and white tile wall, facing away from him. Ned hesitated, expecting another signal. Should he go over there? The woman looked over her shoulder, pursing her lips. He had that nervous feeling he got at the beginning of a game or before seeing a teacher during office hours that something uncertain was going to happen, and he would be blamed for whatever it was, whether or not it was something he'd actually done. He thought of how Matt did things with natural assurance, as if it were obvious. Ned walked over and stood next to the woman, his hands in his pockets. She was tall, taller than he was. "It's at my place," she said in a hoarse voice, matter-of-factly. She looked him up and down. "You'll have to come there."
You know, I mean, the story, it just blew me away. This story absolutely blew me away. And I don't want to give anything away because I want the readers to be able to experience the entirety of it as a fresh, newcomer to the story. But where did you come up with that idea? I mean, without giving anything away. I know that's probably an impossible question because we're trying to be.
It was actually a story I heard. That's all I'll say.
Wonderful. Got it. Perfect.
But then
Perfect. Yeah.
I only heard the very outer
yeah.
elements of it.
Yeah.
But I made up everything.
And that's what a writer does. They listen. Because people will always tell you whatever.
But they don't usually give you the details.
No, and that's okay. That's okay. The
well, that helps.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe sometimes there'll be one or two details.
Right. I get it. But the anyway. Yeah. Wonderful.
Fingernails for mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good for you. Anyway, I hope everybody enjoys that story. Okay, so the language of cats and dogs. And do you want to read from that or not?
I'll read just 2 paragraphs.
Okay. Yeah, do because
it kind of it's a story it's kind of a Me Too story.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say,
but it's a story that I've sort of that's been sitting there a long time. That again, I wasn't really ready to write.
Yeah, and
this sort of describes why it's being written now. It's actually a character who's looking back on a sort of bad incident with her college professor.
Right.
But it was 40 years ago, and the character is actually a character out of Monkeys.
Yeah.
And it even takes place during the time that Monkeys took place in 1978. But it doesn't refer to anything at all. And she's thinking about this moment she had, this creepy moment.
You mean it doesn't refer to monkeys, but...
Yeah, right.
Right, but it's a story
her name is Sophie Vincent, and she's thinking about this creepy experience she had. You think you are done with an experience once it is over, and it is set into some version in a story, and there it will sit. But if you return to the experience many years later, because you are, say, urged by a movement in the culture to re-examine the treatment of women, an examination which seems to come every 50 years or so before it fades away again, then you might discover new details waiting for you unnoticed. What you do not know when you're young is that you may, as your life goes on, return to things that happened, and that the more you visit a thing, the more time you spend experiencing it in reflection, in memory, so that an event which took, say, an hour in your life may afterward be recalled and visited by you 50 times over, each time you remember it. Moments of happiness, such as the period one fell in love, may be remembered again and again, weeks worth if it was a really compelling thing to think about. And moments when one was shocked might similarly be preserved, not voluntarily, and exist as a freeze frame. Exactly.
The fellow in this story and his family, I mean, it's just so well rendered. Whoa. But again, there's that sense of quietness to the sentences, like I was saying about, the Boston Commons at Twilight, but there's always it's not that your sentences are quiet, they're just so precise and settled in and of themselves. And this is true with this story as well. But there's this violence, but we never see it. And that was I thought that was very, very smart and very intriguing to realize that. Did you ever write that scene and cut it, or did you just never write that scene?
Never wrote that.
Yeah, I get it. Wonderful. Well done. Really, really well done. Yeah.
I am suddenly appearing here out of the ether. Thanks to you both for this conversation and the reading. It's wonderful to hear the pieces of these stories. And we have a whole bunch of questions from our great audience. So if this is a good time, I can throw some your way.
Certainly. You tell us it's a good time.
All right. Well, I feel like you seem like you could talk for a long time. So Carl Little from up in Mount Desert Island area is wondering about the places that both of you have long-time connections to places in Maine. And the question is about what are some of the ways that those connections play out in your writing? And that's a big question. And then also the very specific question of, do you write here?
You go ahead. You go first, Liz.
You're
more long time.
Well, I am very much from Maine. I mean, going back, actually my ancestors go back to 1603. That's how much I am from Maine. So there we go. And so as a result of that, I just feel like it's literally my DNA, because it probably is. I just feel that this is what I know best, for better or for worse. It's just what I know. It's what I grew up with. It's what, has been inside me forever. And that's why I write about it, because it's literally like looking at the back of my hand, which is like one of the most familiar parts of me, because as a writer, you're always, whatever. So that's how it's affected me. And yes, I write here, but I can write anywhere. But yes, I absolutely do write in Maine. I've written a lot in Maine. Yep.
So I came to Maine in the summers growing up, but I came every year growing up. And then in 2000, I moved here and lived here on this island where I am right now, North Haven, for sort of 8-9 years. And now I sort of go back and forth between here and New York. So it is I grew up in Massachusetts, but I kind of have more of a attachment to Maine. I mean, I feel fondly about Massachusetts, but maybe because just that August that I was here, it was sort of the most magical time to be here. So I was in love with it. And almost all, Maine is not in this book. I'm sorry to say, that sort of was random, but almost all my books have a big part of Maine in them.
Great, thank you both.
As a location. Yeah.
And Leanne is wondering if each of you, and I think you would both have different sets of experience with this, but could talk a little bit about writing linked stories versus writing a short story or a few short stories that aren't related, versus realizing you're writing a novel or starting out writing a novel. Are those just simply different games? I once was I remember being at a talk with Bill Rohrbach where he was talking about the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction, and he was like, his response was an easy one, but it made sense. It was like, if somebody hands you a football, you don't try to play basketball with it. It's just a different game, So I'm just curious how each of you see those issues.
You want to go ahead, Susan?
I'll go. I would say that stories are definitely my first, not just first love, but the thing I relate to the form I relate to the most, I think. And when I write something longer, I just think it's a lot of stories put together. You know, I'm just telling a longer story, and just it's going on literally longer. But that I kind of still like the short story, not just the form, but that it asks you to really zero in on things, and stick to the point, kind of. And in, you know, with this collection, I realized there are a number of stories here that have characters from like another book. And you think, you know, when I was writing this last story, The Language of Cats and Dogs, I thought, well, this is very much like, this could be this same character. I could give her another name and make her the same girl from Massachusetts who's had something. And I thought, no, I've already got that character. I'll just have her have another story, you know. So I keep very much in mind all of my characters. There's, no one's ever noticed this, but in my second novel, it's called Folly, and it's about old Boston between the wars, that the characters in Folly appear in evening, like at a party, you know, just they're in the same world and they're older, but they appear there. So I keep track of all my characters. They can move in and out. They'll probably more and more they'll start intersecting.
Hmm. Well, for me, I honestly just happened upon the form with Olive Kittredge. I just understood right away that was the form that book would be written in. And then when I wrote that, I realized, oh, this actually is the way my mind works. So for me, it's never been a conscious decision in a certain kind of way. It's just the way my mind works. I just seem to like the interconnectedness between the characters, and that's what I do now. Yeah.
Yeah, you do it pretty well, I think, Liz. You've got it down.
Yeah, agreed. So I love that conversation that you two were having earlier about sentences. And I was wondering if you could, and both of you are tremendous writers of sentences, and clearly spend a lot of time on those sentences. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you're listening for when you're doing that fourth or fifth or 10th rewrite of
Right.
you know, tightening down the language, or
Right.
what kind of mindset do you have to get in to do that,
Right. Do you want me to go? Well, anyway, so I'll go for, let me do this one first. But for me, it's very, it has to do with the ear. Every sentence that I write ultimately has to do with the ear, because the reader is hearing it in my voice, but they're hearing it, and I have to pay attention to the way the words fall. And so the ending of the sentence needs, you know, it's not, it sounds like that's overly conscious, but it's not, it becomes natural. But I am very aware of the reader as I write and of what they need. And the sentence has to, in my mind, has to land perfectly on the reader's ear, every sentence.
Well, I sort of have a different, I mean, the same thing, but I think of more of the rhythm.
Right.
So it's a sound too, but it's more the rhythm of one sentence after another. You don't want the same rhythm to happen.
Right, I got it.
You want rhythm sometimes to be in conflict with the content.
Yep.
Or you want it to carry, usually it's good if it is in conflict with it, I think, you know. And then also I find with rewriting, it's just not getting like the sentence perfect. Or not even perfect. Like you want to weed out the cliches, which just roll out of the mind, like, you know, easily. So you weed out the cliches, and then you weed out the way you've seen someone say it before.
Yeah,
so you try to own it that way. And then I find in the, like you say, that fifth or sixth or eighth version, it's like if you're digging, you suddenly get down to like a whole different clay.
Right.
Like you get to a thing that wasn't on the top of your head, wasn't the vision that you had in the scene that you were doing, but you're like, oh, turns out I'm discovering something else here. And you discover it in the writing. You discover it
you do discover in the writing, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. But you discover it by going over and over
That's
again.
right. That's right. It's not like something that you can think about while you're sitting on your couch staring into space. You have to be writing it. You have to be in there, inside the sentences, and then you will. And I understand what you're saying. You're going deeper and deeper. And that's really well put about the play and stuff. Yeah. So I get it. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. What about, and Susan, maybe you could start with this one, thinking back on this, looking at this collection, which were the hardest stories to write, or the ones that maybe, and I don't know what that means, maybe they took the longest?
I can answer.
Okay.
Recent ones. You know, it's what you were asking about, how much do you rewrite. The earlier, you know, the ones I was writing in the 90s, I was just going, you know. I didn't have anything else to do but write. So I was excited by it. Now I have I took a long, I mean, why I don't write is kind of, it's an ironic title, but there was a long period. There's sort of been a good 20 years when, you know, I just wrote one book. So I don't write for a lot of reasons, you know. There was a lot of not writing going on. And part of it was the feeling that, can I really come up with something that I care enough about to share, that's good enough that I can share enough? And for a long time, I couldn't. You know, I was writing a lot of poetry, and I'd still, you know, I'm compelled to put words down on paper. So I always kept doing that. But I didn't feel this feeling like what I have to say is kind of worth it, I guess. And then I've discovered, I'd say in the last 10 years, that if I really, really work at it a long time, I'm gonna get something. But it takes a long time. So, you know, I have to say, I mean, just to even hear from you, Liz, that you like this story, it's like so gratifying, because I'm like, really? Did I pull it off? You know, I don't have that same sort of, you know, I've written 7 books, but it doesn't matter. You know, each time you're sort of, can you do it anymore? Or can you do it differently? Or, you know, so it turns out it takes a lot longer now to get something.
That's great. Liz, do you want to take that? Either like a particular story that was particularly hard to write, or a type of story that for you?
Well, you know, I mean, the story that, I mean, I'll just mention it briefly because probably most people haven't read it, but in Olive Again, there was a story about Suzanne Larkin, who was a lawyer and came back, and that was very, very hard for me to write. And I was surprised at how hard it was for me to write, because I felt like I knew Suzanne, and yet she was slipping all over the page. And I almost put it aside, because it's like, if a character can't enter my character, then it's not going to happen. And I will find that rather early on. But with Suzanne, I just kept thinking, you know, I know you, why aren't you helping me out? And I mean, I have no idea why she wasn't, but eventually I changed the structure of the story, and I didn't throw it away. But that was there were just absolutely terrible drafts of that story for a long time. Whatever.
So we probably just have time for one more. So I'm just gonna grab one here from our list. You could you can answer one of 2 questions. Who are you reading now? Or or who do you read when you need a boost, when you need some inspiration, or you need to, those writers that can, make something happen in you.
Right. Do you want to go, Susan, or you want me? I mean,
Yeah, I'll go. I just read this. It came out last year. Karen Russell's collection of stories called Orange World, and it blew my mind. I mean, she's very, very different. Right? It was so exciting to like a writer that doesn't write like I do. Writes about these kind of incredibly imaginative worlds and unworldly things happening. And I've been reading a lot of, I read a beautiful memoir called Long Ago and Far Away by W.H. Hudson, who wrote at the turn of the century about growing up in Argentina. That is just magical. Someone suggested that to me. And then lately I've been reading a lot of detective novels and sort of noir novels. I'd sort of like to write one. So I'm kind of, I'm not studying them, but I find I can be in them with less of an attitude than I have when I'm reading other kinds of fiction. I just read an incredible one by Ruth Rendell called A Judgment in Stone, which was fantastic about the hurdles of someone who is illiterate, and it's amazing.
Probably my go-to person is William Trevor. I find such comfort in every sentence that he has written, and there have been many sentences. Obviously, he's been very prolific. He's been so prolific that you can always go and find something that feels like you haven't read it before, even though I have. So he's sort of my go-to comfort person in a certain way. But with the pandemic and everything, I think my reading habits have changed, and it's interesting. I mean, it's not that interesting, but it's whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
are you reading? Because a lot of people say they can't read.
Yeah, and I've been reading like biographies. I read the biography about Churchill, and I've been rereading the biographies of FDR. It's which I read already, and yet I find myself like, oh, let me just reread this, and that's my particular need at the moment, I think, to be reading about these political figures from different stressful periods in our history. So anyway.
Yeah, biographies are great.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say a huge thanks to both of you for
thank you. It was lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks to our friends at Print, and on behalf of Maine Writers and Publishers, thanks to everybody out there for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you, Print. I wish we could have been there together. We're all so nearby, but
Go buy some Print.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was great. Thank you so much, and congratulations, Susan.
Thank you, Liz. Really, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.